Yo, 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 welcome to Talkin Blue with Cody and Vince. That's Cody, I'm Vince, and we're here to talk about the Dodgers. Before we get into everything, just make sure to check us out on the Bleed Lows podcast or the Bleed Lows podcast YouTube page. Check everything written out on DodgersBeat.com. And last week, we had our episode, Cody, and we talked about Kyle Tucker the whole episode about whatever, and I think we both ended up concluding that he wasn't going to sign with the Dodgers. And then about 5 to 10 minutes after we got done, Kyle Tucker reported he had signed with the Dodgers or had agreed to a deal with the Dodgers. I wasn't able to go live. I know you were, but take me back to when you saw whoever you saw that Kyle Tucker. One, when they got Kyle Tucker. Two, when you saw the number of how much it was.
Yeah, I think I'm not going to try to take credit for speaking it into existence, but we kind of did. We spent like a good at least 20 minutes at the end of that episode, kind of going over, what we thought Tucker was going to get, all the rumors that were coming out. I remember we heard the Mets stuff with the 50 million AAV, the Blue Jays still being in with the long term offer, and then the Dodgers having really nothing leaked out at all. The only thing that everyone assumed was that they were offering a short-term high AAV deal, which was kind of a given considering they've done that with other high-profile players that they were kind of interested in but didn't want to go long term with. Like Bryce Harper in 2019 is like the most famous example. But yeah, we close out the show. Not even 15 to 20 minutes later, we get the Passan bomb out there saying that Tucker inked the deal with the Dodgers. And at first, I was just kind of like, in hysteria. I didn't expect it to happen just because I didn't really know the level of the Dodgers' interest. And even though it was only a short term deal, I really did find out how interested they were in Kyle Tucker because they gave him $60 million. Obviously, it went down a couple $1 million because of the signing bonus and then some deferrals, typical LA thing, but ended up still being a record breaker. $57.1 million, I think, is the CBT hit. Crazy. It's a crazy news cycle kind of going over the past week, looking it over, seeing how he fits. They finally make the deal official today. And it's just kind of getting you really on that next level of the excitement coming into 2026, which is kind of hard for the Dodgers to top. Like you win back-to-back World Series, it's kind of hard to keep fans, I would say all fans invested after that, but I mean, who knows, Andrew Friedman knows how to keep keep the crowd going.
Yeah, he definitely knows how to keep us going. And it was, I have all the main reporters on Twitter notifications. So I saw it. And every time I see it, I still have to go double check, make sure it's the right one, even though I'm not subscribed to the fake one. And then, you start sending out text or talking to whoever you talk to. And then you get the numbers. And the numbers were kind of crazy. But then as Dodger fans, we were like, oh, that's a lot of money. But at the end of the day, like, okay, who cares? But then breaking down the numbers, 4 years, $240 million, $65 million signing bonus, $30 million deferred. Like you mentioned, record AAV with 57.1 million after the deferrals, opt outs after year 2 and year 3. And Bob Nightingale just reported that the Dodgers will pay him 1 million salary in 2026. So they'll pay him and Otani 3 million combined salary in 2026 for whatever that's worth. But yeah, I mean, it was staggering in the sense of, oh, the Dodgers are like really playing big ball now, and you kind of wonder like, okay, why was it just a simple flex? Was it, did they really like him? Was it, you know, you know, guaranteeing or going after the prestige of a three-peat? And we got a little bit, maybe not those answers specifically today, but Brandon Gomes said there was really nobody that moved our World Series odds for 2026 more than Kyle Tucker. And that makes sense because if they go out and get Tarek Skubal in a trade, he pitches once, twice in the series, depending how long the series goes. And realistically, with the Dodgers starting rotation, you're lifting it, but you're not lifting it as much. Kyle Tucker lifts this offense, lifts this lineup, and lifts this team more than anybody else that was really out there that in terms of free agency or available on the trade market. And yeah, as Dodger fans, we get spoiled. We got to have fun on social media for, the day or two after it happened because we continue to ruin baseball, Cody.
Yeah, and I think I wrote about it on DodgersBeat.com, kind of looking at the, what this does with the Dodgers offense specifically and the team moving forward for 2026 and beyond. But kind of right away is the Dodgers offense in the second half of the season was kind of subpar to what their standard is. No, they weren't like bottom half in the league in some metrics, but they went from being like top 1 and 2 in like OPS, home runs, average, runs, RBIs to kind of being around almost getting kicked out of the top 10 in the second half. And it definitely showed in October. 2024, that team slugged their way to a World Series. I mean, they were scoring, 8 to 10, 11 runs a game every once in a while against the Mets or the Padres or whoever they were playing. Even the Yankees, they scored their fair share of runs. But um, they were carried by their pitching this time around, which is expected when you have a rotation headlined by Yamamoto, Otani, Glasnow, and Blake Snell, who all went, leaps and bounds with the state of the Dodgers bullpen going deep into games and kind of making, the reason why they make that much money is because to pitching games in the way that they did this past year. I think Freeman knows that you can't do that every single time. So as like in 2024, he saw that the starting pitching was the problem. He solved that by signing, Blake Snell and then acquiring additional pitching depth and kind of hoarding what we already had. 2025, he sees, hey, well, the offense looked a little old in the second half of the season. Now we signed Kyle Tucker, albeit a short term deal, but he's only 29 years old. I thought this was interesting. He's only the second player in the Dodgers lineup, probably for every day, that's under the age of 30. The other one would be Andy Pajes. So you put a little bit of youth. Kyle Tucker is not elite in the sense across the board. He's not going to blow you away in one metric over the other. He's just very consistent. And when he's healthy, he can be really good. The season I look at is 2024. He was in the running for being the American League MVP before he, fractured his shin, I believe, kind of derailed the rest of his season. But just even playing a half a season almost, he had like 5.5 WAR. Last season was kind of a dud for him, but it was also due to a wrist injury that he and the Cubs couldn't really agree on how to go because the Cubs were in a playoff contention. They only had him for 1 year, so they kind of wanted to play him injured or not, and that may have not been the best case scenario for Tucker, and it kind of may have hurt his free agency this time around. But I think overall, you get a left-handed bat. Dave Roberts said he's going to bat either second or third in the order. That's something we can definitely debate here as well, kind of where they're going to go with that. But I just think on the nose, Kyle Tucker upgrades the lineup. The pitching staff looks really good, and I know they've been reportedly interested in potentially adding another arm, even though Freeman shot that down a little bit. But I think this roster right now is by far the best in baseball and probably the best of this, Guggenheim era.
Yeah, it's hard to, you go up and down lineup, and we've done this before with Dodger lineups where you're like, oh man, this lineup is, pretty crazy. But now, you're at a point where, yeah, there's a chance that, Mookie doesn't figure it out, or yeah, maybe there's a chance that Teo has a similar season to what he had, and all this type of stuff. But now it's not, oh, we need this guy to be good, we need this guy to be good, we need this guy to be good. It's, oh, this guy might not be as good, but it doesn't really matter. Like you have Otani, you have Tucker, you have Freddie. Like you expect those guys to be solid and consistent. You have Mookie, Teo, who are looking to bounce back a little bit from last year, and then you have Muncy and Smith, who when healthy have been very consistently good. And then you have the bottom of the order with Pajes and Edman and whoever else you put down there, and it's hard to really be upset at it. Obviously, there are a lot of people upset about it. We'll talk a little bit about this subject of, good for baseball, bad for baseball. The reports now are that owners are for sure going to push for a salary cap, lockouts for sure coming, all this type of stuff. And yeah, I can imagine that a lockout is, I don't know how long, but there's going to be a lockout. Like it just seems like that's for sure guaranteed. But again, like there's ways we got to this point. One of the ways we got to this point is other teams not spending or even looking to spend or looking to live in that 75 to 90 win spot where you're going to be fighting for a playoff spot. You're going to be in the playoff race until the end, and maybe that's good enough for your team. But Cody, we once again ask: good for baseball, bad for baseball. What are the Dodgers doing?
I mean, Obviously, you look at what, as Dodger fans like us, people that cover the team, regularly, we love what the Dodgers are doing. Kind of from a baseball economic standpoint, we would hope that owners across the league would kind of see what the Dodgers are doing and saying, hey, rather than just, fall over and die, why don't you go sign a player or two and try to combat that team? The Mets did it, whether it was a panic move or not. They brought in Bo Bichette. They traded for Luis Robert. They're trying to put all their chips in to be the team to beat in the National League, at least in the National League East, and challenge the Dodgers. The Phillies, they still have a pretty good roster on that side on the East Coast as well, even though they haven't done too much this offseason other than retaining what they've currently had. But then you look at the bottom half of the league, and that's kind of been the problem with baseball. There's just those, 10 teams, that really don't want to compete, don't want to put their best foot forward, don't want to spend the money. Everybody knows the teams we're talking about. We're talking about the Sacramento, Las Vegas A's. We're talking about the Miami Marlins, who, it used to be once they win a World Series, then they rebuild. But now it's like, they made a wild card, got eliminated, and decided to rebuild right after that because they didn't want to pay some of these players that were getting close to free agency. So it's kind of a broken product for those teams. And I'm interested to see what happens, next off season once, that CBT or the CBA expires. I imagine there is going to be a lockout. And I tweeted out yesterday where I can't wait when people figure out the difference between a lockout and a work stoppage. Because before the Dodgers signed Kyle Tucker, there was always going to be a lockout. The players in the union and with the owners, they were always going to disagree on some sort. The owners always try to go with a salary cap. This came up last time in 2022 as well. Never came to fruition. I am pretty bold, I guess, when I say this. I don't think there's going to be a salary cap after whatever negotiations they have. I just think it's going to be harsher penalties, maybe some limits on deferrals. But I credit, what Scott Boras said today is, there's really nothing broken with this system. It's just the Dodgers taking advantage of the Ohtani and the uniqueness of his contract, which you can try to say it's unfair, but there's not going to be a player in the next 50 years that takes a deal like he does. He's one of only a few athletes of all time to reach $100 million plus in endorsements per season. And that's the reason why he can defer, basically his entire contract. And the Angels could have benefited from this as well. And they even had him on an even more friendlier option. They had him in pre-arb and arbitration. So they had him under league minimum for a while. And then, going even to arbitration. I think the most he ever made in an Angel uniform per season was probably like $25 million around that range, maybe 30. If you have the number, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. But the Dodgers, they're just taking advantage of Ohtani, and they see the window. They see the what they have open right now, and they know it's not going to be there forever. So why not go all in over these next, 3 or 4 years and then continue to replenish it with a good farm system, which they continuously rank top 5 in. So I think the lowest they've ever ranked with Andrew Freeman was, I think, 6th one year, and they ended up rebounding it and being in the top 3 the very next year. So clearly the window's not really going to close anytime soon, but if you're going to argue what the Dodgers are doing as broken or breaking baseball, I just can't argue with you at this point. I feel like it's one of those things where it's like you can't change their mind. It's like I have my opinion, you have yours. We'll see what the owners and the players decide in the next 12 months.
Yeah, and I guess you can, always get into semantics of breaking baseball. What does that mean? Because yes, revenue's up, TV ratings are up, like everything's seemingly up. The Dodgers, when you have a bona fide villain, people are tuning in to watch. When the Warriors got good, that people were watching. Then when they got Durant, more people were watching. Not to really root on the Warriors, but maybe to root against them and see them lose and hope they lose. And there's people that I can't. Not everyone's going to compete with the Dodgers, right? And I understand that. And we've talked about this, but it's just to the point of nobody's asking you to compete with the Dodgers if you're the Pirates. But hey, maybe assign one guy to $100 million contract one time, and maybe that's a guy that the Dodgers don't have now. If one team had signed Snell and one team had signed, whoever, and one team had signed all these guys that the Dodgers have, Freddie's wasn't a bank breaking deal. It was just a pretty good, fair market deal. If all these teams had signed those guys, then the Dodgers wouldn't have these guys, and they would have had to figure out something else. Would they have figured out something else? Yes. Would it have led to back-to-back World Series championships? I don't know, But again, that's not for the Dodgers to worry about. That's for everyone else to worry about. And yeah, we'll see what happens when we get there. But real quick, appreciate having the comments here. See one from Ravishing Rude Rick. Glad to see me back podcasting. Yeah, we're here every week talking blue and hopefully more once the season gets going. So appreciate you. We were going to talk about Kyle Tucker's intro presser, but we got dropped something from our producer right here that the Mets are in talks to trade for Freddy Peralta. We had Freddy Peralta as something to talk about here. So let's get into it. Dodgers were reportedly still involved in the Peralta trade talks. Katie Woos, kind of mentioned that they had a lot of guys that missed time and had a lot of guys that threw a lot of innings or went deep into the season. So, maybe that they were in. We've had some reports from, that the Dodgers were aggressively involved. That's kind of tailed off a little bit. And now the Mets are seemingly in on it. You would imagine the Yankees are still kind of in on it. Now that they signed Cody Bellinger, Friedman kind of said that they weren't going to be in on anything big or starting pitching or, I forget the exact wording. It wasn't definitively, we are not doing this. But do you believe that the Dodgers are in or out on Freddy Peralta, and should they be in or out?
Yeah, I think the Mets and the Peralta rumors have been really starting to catch steam over the last like 10 hours. I think they were even starting to throw names out there in terms of prospects and packages that were going to go back. And for the Mets, it does make sense that one of their biggest needs is starting pitching depth, and Peralta on a 1-year, $8 million deal. The David Stearns, used to run the Brewers, so I imagine he probably likes Peralta, and now he theoretically has the payroll to kind of maybe possibly give him the extension he wants. But I think the Dodgers' interest for starting a pitcher in the rotation goes beyond just Peralta. It could even be anybody out there, whether it's the open market or the trade market. And Skubal obviously is still technically an option as well, whether it's before the season or at the trade deadline, depending on how the season shakes out for the Tigers. But it does make sense on paper. And that's kind of what I tried to argue in one of my articles on Dodgers Beat was that, you look at the Dodgers rotation right now and just the pitching staff in general, they have 6, 7, 8 arms that could theoretically start, 30 games a year. And that's before you factor in the injuries. And that's been the Dodgers' biggest Achilles heel, even before October of this past season, was that, Tyler Glasnow, Shohei Ohtani, Blake Snell, Clayton Kershaw, Emmett Sheehan, all these guys and others missed time on the injured list, for extended periods of time. Blake Snell only made like 11 starts. I think Glasnow made less than 20. Ohtani, he made his few rounds of starts, but he was gradually being built up from 1 inning to 2 inning to 3 inning and so on. Yamamoto was the only guy I think that cleared 30. And then even you look at the season before that in 2024, it was even worse. I think the guy who led the team in starts was Gavin Stone with like 24. And it just hasn't been a thing of consistency for the Dodgers. They just got fortunately healthy at the right time of the season, and it showed. It's hard to bank on that for this upcoming season, especially you look at Yamamoto's workload, what he did last year in year 2, factoring in what he did in October. Tyler Glasnow has always been a wild card. Blake Snell has never been a guy minus 2 seasons. Coincidentally, he won the Cy Young those years when he made 30 or more starts. They don't really have a workhorse on that rotation. Freddy Peralta is like the definition of that. Made 33 starts, sub 2 ERA, I believe sub 3 ERA, almost sub 2. Really, really good, consistent starter, can eat innings for you. That's something the Dodgers rotation is currently lacking right now. But I think they're going to go the opposite route, saying, well, now we have at least 10 arms that can start for us. So if we need to fill innings here or there, River Ryan, Gavin Stone, Emmett Sheehan, definitely take the ball every 5th or 6th day. Roki Sasaki is going to be starting again this year. So clearly they have options. I do believe Friedman, where he's saying, starting pitching isn't at the top of their to-do list, but with a guy like Freddy Peralta or anybody else, if they're out there on the open market, the Dodgers are always going to do their due diligence and kind of, at least inquire about it.
Yeah, and if the Mets, there's continued tweets here about they're close to a deal. There's maybe some names starting being mentioned, so it could happen tonight. Good for the Mets and good for baseball. That's good for baseball. That they because they did get Bo Bichette, they did get Luis Robert, and you're trying to figure out where everyone's going to play and where they're going to hit and how they're going to hit. But at the end of the day, like they still didn't have the starting pitching, and Freddie Peralta doesn't fix them 100%, but he fixes them enough to make it interesting, at least for sure. And the Mets could do more or do at the deadline, or some of these young guys could step up for them. But uh, away from Peralta, I agree with you. We talked about it last week. I think the Dodgers are always going to be in on good players, and always going to be kind of mentioned in that mix. And Freddie Peralta made sense in what he is, and like you mentioned, that they don't have like the Clayton Kershaw this year where they can just throw him out there and not necessarily worry too much about will he get hurt or anything like that. Freddie Peralta, not that they would want him to, but he'd be an impending free agent. They'd be a guy they could probably push to 100 plus pitches each time out. So, but let's get back into Kyle Tucker press conference. Was kind of short, was kind of I don't want to say boring, vanilla, but makes sense with Kyle Tucker and kind of what we've seen from him so far in his career. But I'll start it off with the quote of kind of why he made the decision to come to the Dodgers. He said, quote, "It's a big decision, so you still got to weigh out everything. But this team and the city and the fan base kind of makes it a little bit easier to make some decisions. That is just ultimately what he wanted to do, is come here and be part of that and try to win another World Series." Now, obviously, guys are going to go that route a lot of the times when they're talking, but at the end of the day, the Dodgers gave him 60 million a year and nobody else was. But the Mets were close. The Blue Jays gave him less, money per year, but more stability over the course of 10 years from the reports we've had so far. So, at the end of the day, he did still kind of pick the Dodgers, and the Dodgers are a destination, and it makes sense. And, as much as he's probably not going to say all these other things, the money help, but money helps when you're coming to a good team too. Like it's not just, if the no, maybe not Marlins, he's from Florida. If somebody else had offered him the same deal or maybe a little bit more money, I think you still got to consider the Dodgers, and that's kind of where we're at with LA and with the Dodgers and with the way the team's been. Is that you're going to have a chance at pretty much any free agent. Spending the most money helps, but also these guys want to come here.
Yeah, I think, Tucker said pretty much all the generic good things that you wanted to say about the team. And like you said, 60 million does talk. But he's coming to a team that is famous right now. Like they have a great fan base. They've led the league in attendance for, so many years now in a row, and they continue to break records. Like they beat their own record last year. They're probably going to exceed that this upcoming season. You got a team that's willing to compete each and every day. You got a group of players, superstar players that, even though they're superstars and they've already accomplished a lot in the sport, they are grinders. They want to be better and continue to build on their legacy. And that includes winning multiple championships. And, you know, three-peat's been on the record from all of them. Kyle Tucker says he wants to help bring another World Series, get his second of his career while he's here. I also just think he's just going to reestablish his own market. I know it's going to be hard to walk away from a 2-year, $120 million deal after 2027, but if he has a really good, 2-year stint with the Dodgers and they win one or two World Series in his time here, and he's a big part of it, I think we're going to see him probably opt out and get another, 6 or 7 year deal if he wants it for more money, because inflation and then the future, all that stuff, that's all going to change. So he has potential to earn even more money than he would have just taken that 10-year $350 million offer from the Blue Jays. I just think, even if you're Kyle Tucker and you see a short-term deal, we mentioned it with Drea when we did the live, kind of reaction, where if you had to choose between the Dodgers for their short-term deal or the Mets and their short-term deal at that time, you saw the Mets and kind of everything that was coming out in their locker room. Seems like they didn't really have too much of a plan per se, and even signing Bo Bichette didn't really seem like, a logical fit as well. It seems like they're the Mets middle infielders right now. They got guys trying to play different positions. Maybe Kyle Tucker said, maybe I'm just going to go play with LA because they feel like they have more things figured out. And yeah, they're the defending World Series champions. Maybe they don't need me, but if they're willing to give me $60 million, I mean, it's not going to be hard to beat that. And, you know, I think he made the right decision. I always thought LA did make the most sense. There was a clear need. They had the money. reset the market, kind of have your career year. Hopefully, you can stay healthy for a full season, and his swing's going to play at Dodger Stadium, man. And I think it's going to be really exciting to see, what he does in the first half of the season, with the guys that are around him. And yeah, we'll see what happens in the next couple of years. But I do think it was a good decision on his part, both, financially and also just building on his own legacy. Because yes, there's that, the explosiveness online about, him being a sellout, Kevin Durant 2.0, all that stuff. But, you know, people are going to look back on the back of his baseball card. And if they see the stat lines that we imagine he's going to put up and the championships that he can possibly win, even just a 2 year stint, I think it's gonna be a good thing for him.
Yeah, he mentioned, Dylan Hernandez got in there and asked about kind of the questions about, his love for the game and, all that type of stuff that we've talked about. And, he kind of avoided the question at first. He kind of answered in the sense of like, even when I'm struggling, I try to block out the noise and blah, blah, blah. And, moving a runner over or making a good play on defense, like all that type of stuff. That wasn't necessarily the question that he was asked, but he gave that answer. And then asked him a little bit, pushed him again a little bit on it, and he said, I think it's just my demeanor, and just that's just how I am. But playoff baseball gets him fired up. He's been playing baseball forever is kind of what he mentioned. And then Andrew Friedman added about it and kind of mentioned the same thing, like his demeanor. He's not that exuberant personality that might be misconstrued, but he said, but for us, it's how does he compete? How does he work? And with that, they got very comfortable. When he's in the box, when he's in the outfield, he competes as well as anybody. And that's the big thing here with Kyle Tucker is, yeah, if you, they talked to a lot of teammates and coaches and, staff and whatever it was, like, it seems like they did their due diligence on him and nothing, came away with it. You can't be that good at baseball and not necessarily have a passion for it. As much as Anthony Rendon got flamed for everything that he said, like, he still got to that point by working. Maybe he didn't work as hard. I don't want to get into that, but for Tucker, the guy's a 5-tool player essentially, and you don't get to that point without loving baseball and being into it and wanting to do it. And he still has something to play for. Like, obviously, he had $240 million. He's set for life, but after those 4 years, he'll still be. You're gonna have to keep playing if he wants to play, and he's gonna have that to play for. He's gonna want to live up to the contract for not just for him, but like the other players in the league that want to continue to make more money. So there's a lot for him to play for. But yeah, I mean, we talked about it. We weren't. I don't think we were generally concerned about it. I think we just kind of brushed it off. And same thing here. Like, the Dodgers have had that knock before on them that they don't care that much, or Mookie's had it, Freddy's had it, they've all kind of had it. And yeah, when you're not going well, it looks like that sometimes. And when you're going well and everything, you're celebrating and going crazy and all this type of stuff, yeah, it looks more fun. And at the end of the day, it just matters what you do on the field.
Yeah, and I think we've talked about it before, and I've talked about it in the past. The Dodgers, they track down the right superstars that they want to play for their team. And Andrew Freeman's even mentioned this before. He said you basically have to, like, you can sign anybody, even if they're the best baseball player in the world. But if they don't have the work ethic to put their foot forward and try to continue to get better, then it's really not worth it at the end of the day for that dollar amount. And if you've covered the team and you've seen the behind the scene videos that we've posted here on the channel and other various Dodger YouTube channels as well, there's guys that are out there on the field every single day, and it's always Freddie Freeman, Mookie Betts, other guys, Miguel Rojas. Pretty much they're always doing some sort of pregame, routine or workout each and every game. And that's just the type of players that the Dodgers covet, even with the ones that you could say that they may have messed up on, like a Julio Urias. He came up through the system and all that, and he was always trying to get better. He was always, even when he looked out of shape, he would try to get back in shape. And then off the field issues, that's kind of something the Dodgers can't really control. Even Trevor Bauer to an extent as well. I mean, look at how much he truly enjoyed the game of baseball and wanted to make himself and his team better. Off the field issues the team can't control there. But at the end of the day, I can't really remember the Dodgers really having a player in recent memory that was, a clubhouse, cancer, didn't care about the game. I imagine they would have steered clear of Tucker even though he would have made the team significantly better with the bat and the glove if he had any of those, traits that you didn't really want to bring to your clubhouse. So I do think a lot of that stuff was probably overblown. I know that, Dylan Hernandez and co and all these other beat writers definitely want to get answers out of him, because I do think I would think he would want to try to save his reputation. And I think he may have gotten caught off guard the first day of the questions, but maybe by when spring training's there, getting covered by the media that follows the Dodgers, we're going to see a lot more of Kyle Tucker than we've ever seen in his career. So we'll definitely see what type of player he is. But I'm not going to buy any of this stuff until we see him in for at least a full season in Dodger blue.
Yeah. So, the only other thing really from there is that he is going to wear number 23. He said he had a conversation with Dave Roberts about number 30, but he knew where Roberts got 30 from. And, ultimately, Roberts had to have a friendly or fun conversation about it. And, again, I think it was Dylan Hernandez kind of joking with Roberts, like, oh, you weren't going to give up your number, or maybe Plunkett. You weren't going to give up your number. And, that's when they kind of mentioned it. But he's wearing number 23 because Michael Brownlee had a big impact on him when he was in Houston, and Michael Brownlee wore number 23. So, we got a, 23 on the Dodgers. I think Adrian Gonzalez was the last big time guy to wear 23, maybe for the Dodgers.
Put some respect on Michael Conforto.
So, yeah, we'll see what happens there. But, let's get on to a little bit more on the Dodgers realm. Ken Rosenthal had an article, or I think it was an article earlier, that says the Dodgers are going to keep Teo. We kind of got we did get confirmation that Teoscar will play left field. Tucker will be in right field. But, two names mentioned, Bobby Miller, Ryan Ward, as guys that could be put out there or traded or on the market or whatever it is. The Dodgers did clear the 40-man spot for Tucker with one of the guys they had picked up a couple weeks ago. But, I mean, at some point, yeah, you might need more roster spots, or you might just want to, Ryan Ward probably deserves to go somewhere where he can get a chance to play, kind of like, they've done that with different guys with Michael Busch. They've done it with Michael Busch. They did it with the other outfit that went to the Reds and had a random 30-homer season. Name's escaping me right now, but they've done it before. But, yeah, I mean, Bobby Miller, I guess we'll start with Ryan Ward. It just makes sense to me that he would be one of those guys that, if a team needs an outfielder, or an outfielder gets hurt in the spring, the Dodgers could say, hey, we have a guy here that, can maybe mash.
Yeah, I think Ryan Ward's the clear guy. He's 27 years old, going into his age 28 season, coming off an MVP season in the PCL last year. There's nothing left for this guy to prove in the minor leagues. It's just, does he have a spot on the Dodgers roster? And as of this point, no, he doesn't even really have a spot on the Dodgers bench once they bring some of these guys back. You got Rojas, you got, Dalton Rushing. Hae-Sung Kim is a guy that is very versatile with the, the defense and the speed. Alex Freeland should be under consideration. They signed Andy Ibanez, who doesn't have any minor league options. So as long as he's healthy and they don't release him or anything or trade him away, he will be on the opening day roster as well. So, you can only carry like 13-ish guys on that position player side. So it doesn't look like he has a spot. They only added him to the 40-man roster to protect him from going into minor league free agency, to where he was possibly rumored to go even play overseas, just because it didn't look like he was going to get a chance at the major league level. But clearly they feel like another team would definitely benefit from his services. They protected him from the Rule 5 draft. They protected him from, the minor league free agent side of things. I think he could be a serviceable bat for a variety of teams out there. And I think the Dodgers are going to kick their tires and possibly try to get some value. Same thing with Bobby Miller, who we're definitely going to get into. He was one of the Dodgers' best pitchers in 2023, started game 2 of the NLDS, didn't go his way, and just really has had a string of bad luck. 2024 was just a bad season. 2025 got off to a bad start, getting hit with a line drive straight to the head. Kind of was a foreshadowing the rest of his season kind of being all over the place, and he ended up finishing in the bullpen. Those two guys just really don't have any value for the Dodgers roster right now, but they have value elsewhere in the league. And I think we could see the Dodgers trade them, not for any major league players, but I think they could just do it as for a way to replenish the farm system with some lower level prospects. And it makes sense that they would do it that route because they signed Tucker and Diaz and they're over the luxury tax for the third or fourth consecutive year. They've lost like 3 or 4 draft picks in the first round of the first couple rounds of the draft this upcoming summer. So if you're going to lose those picks, you got to get those players back somehow. So trades is probably the best route. Benefit of that is those younger players, those prospects won't have to be on the 40-man roster like a Bobby Miller or a Ryan Ward. So they got to have the roster crunch sooner than later. Even though the 60-day IL, I believe pitchers and catchers report on the 13th of February. So the IL will open around that time. So you can clear up a few, but not too many. And you don't want to live the life around the edges for the rest of the offseason with your 40-man roster fully maxed out in January.
Yeah, that's the biggest part of it is you just want to have that flexibility. We've seen the Dodgers utilize that flexibility. The 39th, 40th spot on this Dodger roster has, been a turnstile the last few seasons or even beyond the last few seasons. They've, continued to do that. And, to do that, it's hard when you have almost 40 good enough players to be on your 40-man roster. And that's where you kind of have to push from. And, Scott Schebler was the guy that I thought about. He went to the Reds, had a random 30 homer season. But, yeah, I mean, we even Matt Beatty got traded in it for what ended up being River Ryan. Like the Dodgers can make these little trades with some of these guys that have value to other teams. And, Bobby Miller, it's going to take a lot for Bobby Miller to get back getting considerable, meaningful innings for the Dodgers. It'll mean that there's guys that got hurt, and it'll mean that he flourishes in like a bullpen role. I don't think, even if he went out and threw, sub 2 ERA and AAA, where it's not like he's going to come up for Yamamoto or Snell or Otani. Like, he's not going to come up. So there's not really room for him. It sucks. I love Bobby Miller when he came out. I thought he was going to be that next guy, kind of follow in the Walker Buehler mold of not really caring about anything and being able to kind of be that guy for the Dodgers and postseason as well. And it doesn't quite worked out yet for him. And yeah, he would, he's not that far off from being a guy that was helping the Dodgers and a guy the Dodgers literally needed to get through the 2023 season before, they ended up flaming out in the postseason. So, yeah, I mean, we'll see what happens. But again, spring training, guys get hurt or guys have timetables that aren't quite lining up or, guys aren't hitting the way other teams out there are going to hit and they or pitch like they want to pitch and they might be able to find a couple spots for those guys. And those are probably the first two guys that of significance on the Dodgers 40-man that kind of head out in a deal like that. Last thing we got here, we found out about the Hall of Fame. The rest of the Hall of Fame class joining Jeff Kent, Carlos Beltran, Andrew Jones are in. Both have ties to the Dodgers and both have negative ties to the Dodgers because Andrew Jones was a Dodger and was statistically, I don't know if you put it or someone put it, one of the worst, if not the worst Dodger offensively in a long time or ever, whatever it was. And then Carlos Beltran, who was the main catalyst reportedly in the 2017 Astros cheating scandal. But yeah, I mean, 3 guys going in, 2 of them played for the Dodgers, one of them a little bit more significant than the other in terms of Dodger career. But yeah, I mean, were you surprised that either got in before we get into like general thoughts about them?
No, I think you look at the case for Andrew Jones. Obviously, it was somebody else that put it on Twitter. I threw it in my article as well. Jones statistically was the worst hitter in the live ball era in Dodgers history with a 31 WRC plus. So hats off to him. They signed that 2-year deal and they got rid of him real quick after that. So he has been on the ballot for, I think this was his 9th year. So you look at his first half of his career, one of the best center fielders in baseball history. Then you look at the second half of his career from age 30 to 31 and onwards to where he ended it with the Yankees. One of the worst hitters in baseball. So he had an insane peak and an insane start to his career. I was watching some of the highlights from the 96 World Series where he debuted with that Braves team hitting I think 3 home runs during that fall classic, even though they lost. was a big part of the Braves team. So, and this was back then when they were still involved with the Dodgers in the division as well. So clearly his name was around there as well. Joins the Dodgers, doesn't have the best time, but he's a 10-time Gold Glove Award winner, won them all consecutively. So hats out off to him. So I think if you ask most, if I asked my dad and like people that grew up in that era watching baseball, they would tell you Andrew Jones should have been in the Hall of Fame. So I think it was just a matter of time and it ended up happening this year. So I agree with that. Carlos Beltran, hate him or love him. Statistically, it made sense. He was one of the most dynamic players coming up. Rare player to have power, contact, and speed. Elite at defense back in his heyday. He caused me more painful memories even before the Astros cheating scandal. I remember when he was on that 2013 Cardinals team, had that walk-off hit in game one, I believe, when Zach Greinke was, pretty much, dueling down the Cardinals lineup that year. So joins the Astros, wins the World Series with them to cap off his career. And then, as we know, as the story goes, 2-3 years later, cheating scandal comes out that he's actually like one of the lead people in that dugout, in that clubhouse, kind of planning it all out. Loses the Mets manager job from it and kind of has had to save face a little bit. Hasn't really been in the public eye, but eventually he does get in. So it is an interesting debate to see, if you're really anti-cheating, regardless of what type of cheating it is, you can kind of start a really big debate saying, all right, well, does A-Rod deserve to be in? Does Barry Bonds deserve to be in? Do these guys that did PEDs, do you treat PEDs differently than like physically like cheating with like a trash can sign stealing thing? It is interesting. At the end of the day, I probably would have still voted Beltran to get into the Hall of Fame as well. So I just think it did even out. Jeff Kent, we talked about this on December. Former Dodger, really good second baseman, but it just makes my case for Chase Utley to get in eventually as well, hold more merit.
Yeah, Chase Utley did have a pretty good jump in the voting, so you'd imagine he's going to get in the next couple of years, if not next year. Felix Hernandez also had a big jump in balloting, which is cool to see. He's the guy that you we're starting to get to the point where a lot of people are looking into the advanced numbers, and advanced numbers aren't always the easiest or prettiest thing to look at for baseball purists, but he was the first guy that well, not the first guy, but he was one of the first guys that won a Cy Young with a not so great record. I think 13-12 was his record the year he won it. So we'll see what happens. Matt Kemp received 2 votes, not enough to keep him on the ballot, so he will drop off the ballot. Ryan Braun got 15 votes. I kind of hope that he would get less than Kemp, just to redeem himself at least a little bit for the MVP stealing. But no, but he's also off the ballot. So there's a bunch of guys off the ballot. There wasn't necessarily anybody from this year's class that was going to make it. I think next year Buster Posey's in it next year, so that'll be one to look out for. But yeah, I mean, when it comes to Hall of Fame, there are a lot of different questions and thoughts, and everyone has different opinions on how it is. Especially with the guy like Beltran is actually one of the only guys that really got punished from that because he wasn't a player at the time anymore. He did lose the Mets job. He probably would have got in before this year, but I think the voters made him wait a little bit in order to get this honor. And when you think about that Astros team, like Altuve is pretty much a lock regardless of the situation, but we're not really going to have to worry about anyone else that was part of that offense. Carlos Correa's career trajectory has gone down. There's really nobody else that we're going to have to worry about making the Hall of Fame that was on that team offensively. Justin Verlander will make it on the pitching side, and maybe he knew about it, maybe he didn't, whatever. But yeah, you know, there's certain people you ask that maybe will be more upset at Andrew Jones than Carlos Beltran as Dodger fans. Uh, I don't imagine too many, but there might be some because it was a lot of hype when he came in. That hype died down very, very, very quickly.
Yeah, no, it's funny because it's kind of a little bit before my time, a little too young to like remember the Andrew Jones days, but just doing a little bit of research and watching, kind of and reading about it, it's like, man, it's hard to be that bad, especially in such a short time to where the team just switches things up right away. It's kind of it shows how bad, I guess, the construction of the older Dodger teams were in that era. For them to even make the NLCS in that kind of stretch and back-to-back years as well, it's kind of astonishing, especially when you look into everything that was going on behind the scenes. It seems like they were kind of going with the Angels approach, star power. Like, hey, like this is a good big name. Let's see, even if the advanced metrics, which weren't popular really at the time in the public eye, but behind the scenes, these teams did have them. You know, it didn't make sense, but the Dodgers still signed him anyway. And he was an aging center fielder. Didn't work out. Didn't work out for any other team that he went to. I believe he went to like the Rangers, the Yankees, the White Sox as well. So, but you look at what he did in that peak, like I mentioned, man, it just made sense that he was going to get in. I think that '96 Braves team now has like 6 Hall of Famers on it,
Yeah, I
which
think, or
is
97 has 8, I think.
yeah.
County
So
manager and GM, I think.
it kind of shows the peak that they had during that run. The consecutive division titles, the multiple World Series appearances, and yet the only thing they really have to show for is yes, they have the Hall of Fame players and only one World Series. So it's another way to say don't take what the Dodgers are doing right now for granted.
Oh, another. Oh, but before we got off this time, Passan bomb. I guess not really a bomb. We kind of figured. Freddy Peralta going to the Mets. Jet Williams, Brandon Sproat headed to Milwaukee. We're not
Always
a
done.
Mets podcast, so we don't really have to discuss in depth. But yeah, the Dodgers won't be getting Freddy Peralta right now. So if
Oh
you
yeah.
if you wanted him, you can watch him with the Mets now this
Hey,
year.
shout out to the Mets. They see Kyle Tucker go to the Dodgers, and they said, you know what? Let's bring in Bo Bichette, Freddie Peralta, bring in Luis Robert. They're putting the finishing touches on their season right now. They were embarrassing last year, letting a Reds team. How many games did the Reds win? Like 84,
Yeah,
83 wins, something like that, to make the playoffs. All-time collapse by the Mets. They took it personally. So this is a team that played the Dodgers in the NLCS just 2 years ago. So clearly they have the talent. I like what they're doing. Uncle Steve's a little pissed off right now. Wants to challenge his big brother on the West Coast.
yeah, that's what they should have been doing. So good for them. Cubs are trying. It seems Mets are trying. It seems. There's the other teams that'll kind of be in the mix. So at least it'll make the playoffs a little bit more fun once we get to that point. But Cody, you got anything else before we get out for this week?
No, I think we pretty much covered everything. That'll be a wrap on this episode. Obviously, subscribe to the channel, turn the alerts on. We got a lot of content. We got the Kyle Tucker press conference. We got recent episodes of the Bleed Lows podcast, Talkin Blue here for our lives, and then also the website DodgersBeat.com. That's where we got all the news, rumors, reports, all that stuff out there on the website.
Yeah, stay up to date with the Dodgers beat. Also on social media, they're really good stuff on there as well. Kind of on this date type stuff or old stuff. There's always stuff to kind of look back on. So it's fun following those accounts. Yeah, make sure you follow Cody on X. That's Namely Cody6. I'm Mike Vincent91. And we'll be back next week talking Dodgers, talking Blue, seeing what happens, and maybe talking about some other teams if more deals are made. There's still some guys out there. Framber Valdez is the next shoe to drop, I'd imagine, after all these other shoes have already dropped. So appreciate it, and we'll talk to you later.
See you guys.